The packing happened slowly. Not because there was much to pack, there wasn't, but because each thing was considered before it went into the little canvas bag that lay open on the kitchen table. Spare pairs of woolen socks, folded once, then again. Better to be safe than sorry. There was nothing worse than chilly toe beans. Then books with soft covers and slightly bent corners. In went one on monster trucks, another on jousting, and then one on cakes and baking. A handkerchief that smelt faintly of lavender and soap, and mittens and scarves. Oh, and a small deck of cards, and a few marbles went clinking in for good measure. A small tin of biscuits, just in case. Berry placed the custard creams inside carefully, and placed some kitchen paper on top, so they wouldn't rattle and break. Nothing worse than dipping crumbly biscuits into warm milk, thought Berry to himself. He patted the lid to make sure it was properly shut. Floyd held the bag steady, while Caratina tucked the woolen socks into the side pocket so they wouldn't wrinkle. Then finally, with great care and attention, in the other side pocket, Caratina eased in their curly straws. Millie Moonbeam checked the knot on the string twice, then once more just to be certain. Rosco watched from the doorway, paws comfortably resting on his tumblington. "Well," he said at last, "I think that's us just about ready." Berry's ears lifted. "Rosco," he asked, "will it feel very different?" Rosco smiled. "A little," he said, "but different doesn't mean difficult." Outside, the day was calm and open. The sky was blue and the village lane lay quietly, as though it knew something pleasant was about to happen and didn't want to interrupt. As they pulled the cottage door to, the door knocker rattled a farewell. Rosco turned the key, checked it once, then once again, just in case, and the bunnies set off. The bus stop sat at the edge of the lane, beside a low mossy stone wall and a wooden bench that had been smoothed by many years of sitting. The bunnies climbed up and waited, paws resting on knees, ears flicking now and then as a breeze passed by. "Who are we staying with again?" Floyd asked. "My Aunty Reenie Nectarine," Rosco replied. "She lives in Twigglesford, just beyond the hills." "She makes delumptious pies," Caratina said helpfully. "She does indeed," said Rosco. "Delectable and whisker-licking good." The bus arrived on time and with a warm smile from the driver. As the bus came to a gentle stop, it sighed as though puffed out from the journey. Its doors folded open like a polite greeting, inviting the bunnies on board. "Hello there, bunnies. Off to Twigglesford?" asked the bus driver. "Yes, we are. We're visiting my Aunty Reenie Nectarine." The driver grinned. "Well, be sure to give her my best regards, and thank her for the leek and potato pie she baked me, won't you? I had it for my lunch yesterday. Gert lush it was." "Of course I'll tell her." The bunnies clambered up, and inside the seats were soft and slightly springy. They settled together near the window, the canvas bag placed carefully on the seat next to them. As the bus moved off, the village slipped past. Nash's bakery, the green gate, the bend in the road where the oak tree stood, until soon it was all behind them. Berry pressed his nose gently to the glass. The hedges grew taller, the fields widened. The road curved and dipped, and the bus hummed steadily beneath them. No one spoke for a while. It was the kind of cosy quiet, as they rocked and swayed in their seats, that didn't need filling. Eventually, Floyd said, "It feels like the countryside is changing." "Yes," Millie Moonbeam agreed, "like pages in a wonderfully colourful book." When the bus finally stopped again, the air smelled different. Saltier. Wider. Twigglesford was smaller than their village, but it felt open in a different way. The houses were closer together and of a yellower stonework, but arranged in a horseshoe shape around a pleasant green lawn. Beyond them, just visible at the end of the road, the sea rested patiently, its deep blue calming, but at the same time captivating and enchanting. Aunty Reenie Nectarine was waiting. She wore a soft blue apron dusted lightly with flour, and her fur was the warm colour of toasted oats. Her whiskers curved gently upwards even when she wasn't smiling, which wasn't often. "There you are," she said, opening her arms. The bunnies stepped into the embrace, one by one, and found it was exactly the right size. Inside her cottage, the air was warm and welcoming. Something was baking, something buttery. Shoes were lined neatly by the door. Coats were hung and smoothed. The canvas bag was placed by the table. come in," said Aunty Reenie Nectarine. "You must be travel-tired." The room they would sleep in was small and snug, with a low window and a patchwork quilt folded at the foot of each bed. The quilts were all different colours, but all equally soft. Berry pressed his paw into one and smiled. That evening passed gently. They ate warm pies, of course they did, filled with vegetables and fragrant herbs. The pies were topped with a crust that flaked just enough to endow Whiskers with crumbs. Afterwards they sat together while the light outside softened and the sound of the sea made its way in through the open window. When bedtime came, it arrived kindly. Berry noticed the sounds first, the distant hush of waves, a seagull calling, then quiet again, the house settling into itself. "It sounds like the world breathing," he whispered. Rosco tucked the blankets carefully around each bunny. "It's just saying good night in its own way," he said. As the lights were lowered, Aunty Reenie Nectarine paused at the door. "Sleep well," she said. "Tomorrow the sea will still be there." The room grew quiet. The bunnies lay still, listening. The day had carried them somewhere new, and held them gently when it arrived. All was snug. All was well. Night, night. Morning arrived quietly at Aunty Reenie Nectarine's cottage. Not all at once, just a little at a time. First there was the sound of the sea, a low foamy hush that rolled in and faded back out of the open window, steady and patient. Then the light followed, slipping through the curtains and resting on the patchwork quilts, that were tucked under all the bunny's chinnigans. Berry woke first. He lay very still, listening. The sea didn't sound like the river back home, or the pond in the garden. It didn't gurgle through the rocks, or plop with a lily-pad leap of a frog. Instead, it breathed in, breathed out, in and out, as if it had all the time under the sky. Berry smiled and nudged Floyd gently with his foot. "Listen," he whispered. Floyd blinked, then tilted his head toward the window. "It sounds big," he said. "And calm," Millie Moonbeam added, sitting up and smoothing her ears. Rosco stretched and moseyed to the window. Outside, the sky was pale and stretched wide, the colour of fresh linen. A few gulls drifted past, calling softly, then disappearing again. "Looks like a good day for the sea," he said. Downstairs, breakfast was already underway. Aunty Reenie Nectarine stood at the stove, humming a dainty ditty, stirring a pan of creamy butter beans in a thick tomato sauce, flavoured with thyme and marjoram. Thick slices of crusty bread were toasting on forks above the fire in the hearth, turning golden and smelling warm and inviting. More than a whisker quivered, and there was a distinct rumbling of tumbletons. Aunty Reenie Nectarine made the most wonderful baked beans, and to top the lot, a pot of shiny marmalade sat open on the table, its spoon glinting on the saucer beside it. "Good morning, travellers," she said cheerfully. "Did the sea sing you awake?" "Yes," said Berry. "It sang through my dreams and led me into the day." "That's because it knows you're listening," she replied, setting down a plate. They ate slowly, soft, buttery beans in thick, herby sauce covering slices of toast, charred just enough from the warmth of the fire in the hearth. There were mugs of warm milk and slices of pear that tasted as sweet as rose-petal dew. Outside, the sound of the sea was never far away. After breakfast, coats were fetched and scarves chosen, lighter ones today, though the air still held a cool edge. Aunty Reenie Nectarine handed Rosco a small cloth bag. "For shells," she said, "or pebbles, or thoughts you'd like to keep." The path to the beach wound gently downhill, past cottages with salt-faded doors and gardens full of cheerful plants that didn't mind the wind. The air smelled clean and sharp, with a hint of seaweed and brine. When the tufty grass of the sand dunes faded away into the sand, the beach finally opened out in front of them. The bunnies stopped, eyes bright and wide. The sea stretched distance far, and its blue-grey surface rippled softly. The sand was darker and firmer near the water, pale and smooth higher up where the tide had already been. Waves slid in and folded over themselves with a quiet hush of a sigh. No one spoke for a moment. "It's bigger than I thought," Floyd said at last. "Yes," said Rosco, "but it's not in a rush." They took their shoes off and walked carefully down to the edge of the water. The sand felt cool and compact beneath their paws. A wave crept forward, touched their feet, then slipped away again. The bunnies felt their toes sink into the sand as the water sucked back towards the foamy shore. Berry hopped back with a small laugh. "It's braver than it looks." They wandered along the shoreline, each at their own pace. Millie Moonbeam collected shells, smooth white ones, ridged pink ones, and one tiny spiral she held up to the light. Caratina found a piece of driftwood shaped like an antler and carried it proudly. Floyd discovered a rock with a curly swirl getting tighter towards the middle. He was sure it was a fossil. He'd ask Aunty Reenie Nectarine when they got back to her cottage. Rosco walked a little behind them, watching the way they moved, stopping, starting, noticing. Every now and then a gull would land nearby, tilt its head, then decide the bunnies weren't very interesting after all. They sat on a flat rock to rest, the sea stretching out before them, gleaming and winking. Berry poured a few shells into the cloth bag. "I think the sea leaves things behind on purpose," he said. "So we remember it," Millie Moonbeam agreed. When the sun climbed higher, they found a sheltered spot in the dunes, out of the wind. They shared a simple picnic. Sourdough bread, crumbly sharp cheese, and bright yellow piccalilli were all laid out neatly. Then followed sweet, ripe apricots and Battenberg squares. And to drink, a small bottle of elderflower cordial each. "I'm glad you remembered the curly straws, Caratina," said Rosco. All the while, the sea kept up its steady rhythm while they ate and drank. "It feels different from home," said Caratina, "but nice." "That's how it should feel," said Rosco. "Different enough to notice, comfortable enough to enjoy." By the time they turned back, the tide had crept higher up the sand, smoothing away their footprints as though they had never been there at all. Back at the cottage, Aunty Reenie Nectarine had the kettle on and a pie cooling on the windowsill. "Well?" she asked. "It was exactly right," Berry said. The afternoon passed gently. Some of them rested by the crackle of the fire. Some drew pictures of waves and shells. Floyd lined his pebbles up on the windowsill, smallest to largest. As evening came on, the sea grew darker, its sound deepening slightly as the light faded. At bedtime, Berry lay listening once more. "It's still there," he murmured. "Yes," said Rosco softly, "and it will be in the morning too." The world felt wide, but not too wide. Blankets were tucked under chinnigans. Friendship ears found downy paws. All was snug. All was well. Night, night. The last morning at Aunty Reenie Nectarine's cottage did not hurry itself. The sea was still there, of course. It lay beyond the low window, wide and pale and breathing steadily, as though it had been slumbering peacefully all night and was in no particular rush to begin the day. Berry noticed it first. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his feet dangling, bed socks folded neatly beside him. At home, he would already have hopped down. There were routines to be a-doing of. Familiar ways the morning liked to begin. Here, he stayed still. The horizon did not move closer when he looked at it. It didn't meet him halfway. It simply waited. Floyd stirred under his patchwork quilt. "Is it still there?" he murmured. "Yes," Berry said. "It always is." Downstairs, Aunty Reenie Nectarine's cottage made its gentle morning sounds. A kettle lid rattle-tapped softly as it was lifted. A wooden spoon knocked against the side of a ceramic bowl. Somewhere, flour plumply fluffed down on the kitchen worktop and stayed there. Aunty Reenie Nectarine hummed a cheery tune, bright enough that toast soldiers would march hungrily toward runny egg yolks. It wasn't a tune Berry knew, but that didn't seem to matter. It wasn't meant for remembering. It was meant for welcoming in the day. When the bunnies came into the kitchen, she was already packing things into paper. The bunnies could see slices of yesterday's leek and potato pie wrapped carefully, corners folded just so. There were breadsticks tied with string and a little clay pot filled with cream cheese perfect for dipping in. "You'll want something warm later," she said, not looking up at first. "Journeys have a way of making you hungry." Berry watched her pause, sure, practiced, unhurried. He realized then that he liked her not just because she was kind, or because she baked the most delumptious pies, but because she seemed to know where she belonged in each moment. That felt reassuring and important. When she did look up, her eyes were soft and gentle. "You're thinking," she said. Berry nodded. "I don't want to forget it." She smiled, a small smile, steady and knowing. "You won't," she said. "You don't leave newfound places you love without something rather special happening. You'll see. You mark my words." And she gave Berry a little wink and a knowing tilt of her head. Outside, the bus arrived with its familiar rumble and sigh. The goodbye hugs were the right length and said all they had to say in the quiet comfort of her blue kitchen apron. A hand pressed gently to a shoulder, a promise that didn't need to try too hard. When the bus pulled away, Aunty Reenie Nectarine stood watching until it rounded the bend out of sight. Berry waved longer than necessary. The journey home, as they bobbed and swayed, felt different from the journey there. On the way out, everything had opened. Fields of wheat had widened. The sky had billowed clouds way up high in patterns that stretched out to the horizon. Now, the world slowly gathered itself back in. The hedges returned first, creeping up at the sides. Then the trees, leaves shading the road. The bends twisted and turned, and the bunnies slid a smidge with every curve. The sky lowered, just a little. No one spoke. The bus hummed beneath them, steady and reliable, and the bunnies rocked gently together, their shoulders touching. Millie Moonbeam broke the quiet at last. "I think," she said softly, "that I'm starting to see the difference between journeying out and coming home again." Rosco nodded. Me too. Floyd frowned, pressing his nose to the glass. It feels like the land is leaning closer, he said. Yes, said Rosco. And we're noticing. Berry closed his eyes. Behind his lids, the sea did not disappear. It stayed wide. It stayed patient. Berry found himself thinking of warm flour and apples, and realized he knew exactly whose kitchen that smell belonged to. When the bus stopped at the edge of their lane, the thatched cottage stood just where it always had. Small, solid, inviting. Berry felt it then, a twinge, low and unexpected, like the pinch of a too tight sock. The bunnies went inside. The cottage smelled the same. Wood, wool, books, something green and fresh from the larder, and something faintly sweet from the biscuit tin. But the air felt closer. The walls did not move, and yet they seemed nearer together as Berry walked down the corridor, brushing his paw over the wallpaper. I didn't think coming home would feel like this. It's a funny feeling, Caratina said quietly. Rosco hung up his coat on the hook in the hall. That doesn't mean anything's wrong. They unpacked slowly. Shells were placed on the windowsill. Pebbles rested by the hearth. The driftwood antler found a place on the mantel where, strangely enough, it looked quite at home. The objects did not try to wiggle their way in and plump themselves down. There was no fuss about them needing to find their place. They simply changed the room. That evening, Berry stood at the window. The view ended where it always had, at the hedge, the slope of the hill, the familiar willow tree. But now, when his eyes reached the end, they did not stop. They remembered going further. He looked down at the shells on the windowsill, and the little cream spirally one Caratina had found caught his eye. He picked it up and held it to his ear. From within the shell came the soft hush and sigh of the sea, breathing in and breathing out, in and out. The sea was with the bunnies again. It had found its way with them to the cottage. Happy memories never stayed far away. Aunty Reenie Nectarine was right. Later, curled together in the sitting room, the bunnies were quiet in a new way. Not sleepy, not restless, just adjusting. Rosco poured the warm milk. The kettle clicked itself silent. The clock ticked. Outside, the night settled gently over the village. Inside, the cottage welcomed back its bunnies again. Berry yawned. I think the sea made me bigger inside, he said. Rosco smiled. That can happen. When Berry lay in bed, the beam above him looked the same as it always had. And yet, there was more room beneath it now. Room to breathe. Room to think. The cottage did not shrink to hold that space. It grew warmer. Outside, the hills rested. Inside, the bunnies did too. The world was wider than it had been before, and home, somehow, was too. All was snug. All was well. Night, night.